Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Maggie. It's always exciting whenever you spawn in next to a curse room as Maggie, because that means you can enter it, you can exit it, and immediately use Yam Heart to heal that red heart up again. It's nothing special or spectacular, because the odds are that you're gonna get one red heart when you're actually clearing the boss, or maybe just clearing the floor in itself, but it's still exciting because it's such a perfect match, or at least it seems like such a perfect match, that you can immediately heal yourself up back again. And because of how the item works and the whole meta of Isaac, you don't really rely on red hearts that much if you're experienced at the game, but also you try to get as many spirit hearts as possible, especially by the second floor, so you can get that devil deal, which means that most often than not, Yam Heart is just an item that it doesn't really do anything. It's just there and you necessarily can't use it. The only use it might have besides it is maybe get an extra penny or a few pennies when you're playing the blood bank or something like that, but overall that's still not something that happens too often, and most often than not, unless you really have a lot of battery charges, you're gonna only heal yourself from one full red heart, which is not that spectacular. It's definitely one of those items that's designed for newer players, and it's not really meant for experienced players to use. That's not to say that you can get a breaking synergy with it, but it's definitely meant for people who are struggling at the game and maybe don't have the grasp of how to dodge, or maybe what to do, or maybe in what direction to go, and those people generally have more red health because they don't really get devil deals, and because of that they can use the Yam Heart to the greatest effect. While experienced players, they still can get the use of Yam Heart, but just because you do tend to trade your health away in devil deals and things like that, you don't really necessarily rely on it to kind of carry you through the game. So whenever you can pick up an active item that's just a tiny little bit smidge better than this one, you usually do it. This run though was a particular one. I did have some interesting choices to make, which I shouldn't have made, but I did nevertheless. The first one was Locust of War, and I talked about the Locusts. I think they're okay trinkets. At least they're very flavorful. I do wish that they weren't 4 separate trinkets, because that seems a bit excessive to me. I don't understand that all of them have kind of a special effect, but to me it doesn't really seem like their effects are so unique or so different that it warrants that every single one of them is basically a different trinket. I really would wish that they were maybe a different kind. So let's say that if you had an item which produces flies out of poops, for example, and depending on which poop you shoot, maybe you get that particular fly. I think that would be a bit more flavorful, and you could still implement those different effects of flies in there, but at the same time, it wouldn't be so samey. The Locust of War to me seems like the most unique one, and maybe the most powerful one as well, because it's still an exploding fly, and at least you have to be wary when you actually use it, so you dodge out of the way when it tries to home in on enemies. But other flies are just there, some of them slow, some of them poison. And I think that Locust of Death just has 3 black flies, which just do more damage, or maybe they do damage twice, which doesn't seem that impressive when you think about it. So all of those effects are really nothing too special, and but Locust of War is definitely the one that has the most potential to actually damage you, and that's why I say it's probably not a good idea that I actually picked it up. Especially in dailies, there's a lot of not in dailies, just in any run, but especially in dailies because damage penalty is so high. When you enter into a room, there's so many combinations where enemies are very near to you and you don't really have any time to dodge out of the way. And even if you do, the enemies can still kind of home in on you, and the fly follows them, and then you end up taking some damage from the explosion. It's not a nice feeling. It can get pretty awkward. I did replace my trinket for Cracked Crown, which is, in my opinion, a much of a better trinket, at least a much more of a consistent one. You can get some synergies like set bombs, and that's nothing to be kind of ashamed about. It's a pretty great synergy when you actually think about it, but Cracked Crown is definitely a trinket that's A tier, I would say maybe one of the best trinkets in the game. And I believe what it does is every stat upgrade, or maybe even a stat downgrade that you get throughout the run, it amplifies it and just gives you something extra. So let's say you get some damage on the run via maybe Steven or Cricket's head, this item is just gonna add a little bit of extra damage on top of that. And the great thing is it doesn't only work with damage, it works with every single other stat. And for that reason, I just think it's a premium trinket. It just increases your stats as long as you're holding it. I'm not sure if you pick up more items, more stat upgrade items, if it keeps getting better. And if it does, that's just the more reason to actually keep it. But even if it doesn't, I think at this point I got something like a +1 damage up, some range up, some shot speed up, which is obviously pretty great with Ludovico technique, and all in all, just a very solid trinket which doesn't really have necessarily any negatives consigned to it. The other item, or maybe questionable decision that I made, was picking up Ludovico Technique. And Ludovico Technique is an item that you generally don't want to pick up as your first item, but one problem is that it's a special item. Because it's a special item, it has a ton of fun synergies, but because it's a special item, that means that it's less likely for other special items to show up. So you generally want to get some really cool items alongside that. Maybe not Mom's Knife, maybe when you get Quadshot or something like that, but Brimstone, maybe Technology, Tech Hacks, things like that. But the problem is because, like I said, it's a special item, those items are less likely to show up, which means that you won't be seeing these rare synergies as much. There are very few, not few, but there are a lot of items which work well with Ludovico, and I'm generally always happy whenever I pick it up. But it's definitely a detrimental item, especially if you're going and trying to beat Boss Rush and Harsh, just because of the scale of or how big those rooms are. It's very tedious to actually go and just shoot enemies, and especially in Boss Rush where there's multiple of them. Some of them even spawn more enemies, and with low shot speed especially, it's just so hard to navigate the tier around to actually deal some additional damage to them. One thing that was the third questionable decision of this run was picking up Sinus Infection, and not just Sinus Infection, but essentially every single item or special item or whatever which makes your tears stick to enemies, and that just breaks Ludovico to some extent, because let's say you have Fire Mine, those tears explode, or maybe if you have Sinus Infection, or maybe Explosivo, all of those items make the tear explode, or they make them stick to an enemy. And how they work with Ludovico is they do stick to an enemy for like a few seconds, and instead of the whole duration, they just release immediately and you get your tear back. And that might not seem that bad, but it's actually a very detrimental, especially in this case where I have a lot of tears swirling around because of Monstrous Lung. I try to get and kill enemies, but because eventually, just with how the game works, they stick to an enemy, and when they stick to an enemy, that just means that they last for like half a second, they despawn, and then they spawn back at my player's position. And because of that, when I try to get back in and actually use my tear again, that means I have to move it again, and because, like I said before, some rooms are really big, like Boss Rush, it just takes a lot of time, and overall your DPS drops to pretty much nil. And I wasn't really excited about the synergy. I thought I read about it not too long ago, or maybe in the latest patch it was fixed, and maybe it was fixed in the sense that you get your tear back. And how it worked before was with Explosivo especially, I remember, is that your tear actually stuck to an enemy, and then you had to wait for the tear to actually explode before you got your new tear back. And you can imagine if you have an enemy which ducks a lot or maybe jumps a lot, whenever they jumped, that Explosivo tear would just disappear and your tear would respawn, which means that you would essentially have an Explosivo tear, you would stick it to an enemy, it would despawn it, then you would stick it up again, it would despawn it, and you wouldn't get any damage done. So in that sense, it was a synergy that just broke the game. It made it unwinnable, even though it sounds like it'd be pretty great in theory. In practice, it didn't really turn out that way. And it's the same with Sinus Infection, but I had Incubus, and I said, you know what, maybe this is my saving grace, or maybe I picked up Incubus later. I definitely thought at the time that it's a bad idea to pick it up, but like I said before, I do remember reading about it in the patch notes. I thought it was fixed to some extent, and I said, if I picked up Ludovico Technique and the Locus of War, those are already two bad decisions. You kind of need to double up, or triple up in this case, on your bad decisions to make them good again. And I think in this case it didn't really maybe turn out that well for me. Sinus Infection definitely screwed my DPS over, and I probably did get hit a few too many times for my liking, but it's still, at least it was a novel synergy, and because I had Incubus, at least I was actually able to take advantage of my tear effects and was able to kill Hush relatively quickly. And definitely against Hush it helped me the most, the Sinus Infection, I mean, because Incubus just kept applying a lot of snot shots, and they were dealing quite a lot of damage just over time, while I was actually focusing on other things or maybe dodging. So that's good, but overall I would still not recommend picking up Ludovico Technique and Sinus Infection up, or any other item which makes your tear despawn or anything like that. So besides that, we also had a pretty interesting, not interesting, this is basically it, but the most clutch shop, or maybe the most clutch room of this particular run, was definitely the Harsh shop. And I did buy or get restock before, and I did get a Steam sale, and that just means that I am essentially able to buy as many items as I want, and eventually you're gonna get your Humbling Bundle, and eventually you're gonna get, what's it called, the Jar. And that's probably the most breaking synergy, and that's probably the safest way, not the safest, but the most surefire way to get a breaking synergy with two items which just allow allow you to get a lot of score. In this case, I got 6,000 extra Shrek bonus, and you can see my overall Shrek bonus was 15,000, so that was pretty great for me. But because both of those items exist in the shop with Steam sale and restock, you're essentially guaranteed to get them if you have enough money. While you can get something like a blank card, it's not always guaranteed that you'll also get a Yeva rune. So this is probably the safest way, or maybe the most surefire way if you have those combination of items to actually break the game, and that's exactly what I did. I used the jar a bunch of times. I just spawned a lot of hearts, I picked them up and I just dropped them back out again, and you just keep repeating that, and eventually you finish in the 4th score, or at least the 4th rank, which is just amazing. Like, I cannot describe to you how excited I was. I definitely thought that this was one of those good dailies for me. I didn't take that much damage. Sure, you know, I did take some damage with Locust of War and just because of my Ludovico, but still, I made a very silly decision. I made 3 silly decisions in my opinion, and I still managed to finish or rank quite highly, and I'm pretty proud of that, at least to some extent. I'm excited that I didn't have to maybe circumvent and avoid those fun items, or at least items which I consider fun, just for maybe a higher score. I'm glad that I was actually able to take those items, which maybe aren't necessarily as good, but it still turned out pretty okay in the end. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.